Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. That's ziprecruiter.com/zip. ziprecruiter.com/zip.
We have the tech to get food delivered in 15 minutes, but we all have horror stories about buying tickets. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage. Get amazing tickets in just a few taps. Fees are included, so what you see is what you pay. And the Game Time guarantee means authentic tickets at the best price every time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to concerts, sports, comedy, and more with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
Hey, warmer, friendly, hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in segment number 2 by a good buddy of ours, Paul Fritschner. He does such great work with the Rebound Rundown Podcast, the Big East Digital Network, and so much more. He does some work over at the Field of 68. We're going to chat it up with him about what we are seeing with these NBA draft decisions, some of these big ones that we've got out there in the SEC, how impactful it might be if you do get Coach Pete back for Arizona, and then we also have to chat with him about some of his local teams. He's out there in the wonderful city of Cincinnati. The Bearcats, they made a move in the offseason as they bring in Jared Calhoun as their new coach. How are things looking for the Bearcats for this upcoming season? And Xavier, they signed a lot of guys in the transfer portal, and the Big East in general was just spending, so we're going to be touching upon that as well. In the final segment, we saw quite a few moves in the transfer portal on Monday. I'll give you a recap of those, and here to lead off the show, we saw, well, LSU tried to sign someone that was drafted in the 2020 NBA draft. So we've got a lot of fun to talk about there. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways. We'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, largely they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And as per usual, always beggeth and pleadeth you, send in those Twitter/X questions. It makes the offseason go by a little bit easier, and it makes things a little bit more fun, but we have to touch upon this. LSU is attempting to sign Yam Madar, hopefully I got that correct, to $5 million for this upcoming season. He was drafted in the 2020 NBA draft. He has spent the past few seasons overseas. He was last playing for, hopefully I get this one correct, Paul Tel Aviv. He was out there in, I believe that is Israeli basketball. Don't quote me on that, but he was putting up about 11 points per game. Guy that is able to dole it out. He makes a relatively good point guard, and for his career at the international level, he's been shooting about 39% from three-point range, so no doubt about it, a good ad for LSU. They need help in the backcourt, but yeah, he's 26 years old. If the 5-5 rule passes, he's going to be ineligible. He needs to get a special waiver to be allowed to play. And we all saw what happened last year. It was very fortunate that James Nanji was just so terrible that it made a lot of teams decide, maybe we shouldn't be going after these guys that were drafted in the NBA draft because, man, that guy was brutally bad for Baylor, to say the least. But very interesting to see what happens here. LSU, you knew that they were going to be going international. They certainly are swinging for someone that's international. Very much a, shall we say, litmus test as to how this is handled, if it expedites the process in terms of getting the 5-5 rule passed, because if the 5-5 rule does pass, you're going to see a lot of guys like Tyler Nickel and company that ran out of eligibility after this past year tried to be able to get some of that as well, and well, it has not been very well received with many out there in college basketball hoping that Yam Madar does get that waiver denied because, well, not great when you see guys that are 25 going on 26 trying to be freshmen in college basketball. So there was that aspect of things. What is always amazing, though, is getting on Paul Fritschner. We will talk a little bit about this situation as well, and the fact that LSU, they're still trying to go after Allen Graves, who's currently in the NBA draft as well. We'll take a look at those decisions. We'll take a look at the Big East, the Big 12, and so much more with them on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at CBBAnalytics.com. That is CBBAnalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's great to head out to the lovely city of Cincinnati for this man. That's where we find Paul Fritschner. He does a great job with his own podcast, the Rebound Rundown Podcast. He's a part of 1831 Media out there in the great state of Ohio. He's doing a great job looking at the Cincinnati Bearcats, the Xavier Musketeers, does a little bit of work over with the Big East Digital Network, does some great work over at the Field of 68 when that's in season as well. You probably caught him on some random broadcasts for CBS Sports during the season as well. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at his first and last name, Paul Fritschner. That last name is spelled Fritchner. And Paul, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Greg, I was down in Florida this weekend for a wedding, and I'm sitting there at a table. I get assigned, I'm sitting down at table 8, and I'm talking to the guy to my right that I don't know, but I find out that he's a college basketball fan, and I asked him, I said, do you listen to any podcasts? What's your favorite college basketball podcast? He said, well, I really like listening to that Greg Peterson guy out in Vegas. I said, do I know Greg Peterson? I know Coast to Coast Hoops. So we're sitting on the coast talking about Coast to Coast Hoops. You got it all covered, Greg. It's great to talk to you.
It truly does mean that this podcast is living up to its name as well, because I'm out here in Vegas. You were out there in the wedding on the East Coast. So that warms my heart, to say the least. So at the very least, a mission statement, it has been had, and the check is in the mail for you, Paul. I really do appreciate it, and I always appreciate you joining me because you do a great job in terms of covering this great game as well. And how do you take a look at this year's NBA draft decisions? Because we know that fewer guys as underclassmen entered in the draft this year than in past years, but it feels like this might be the most pivotal year for NBA draft decisions because it feels like we've got quite a few guys on the fence, and I especially look at the SEC. I feel like that conference has a lot to gain/lose here over the next week or so.
You're exactly right. You look at a guy right at the top as somebody that said that they were going to go into the draft. He said it, I think, last week, I'm 2 feet into the draft. But, you never know until the deadline actually comes. Does he stay? Does he go? Texas has for sure had a top 5 portal class. You could argue maybe a top 3, top 2 portal class if you're crediting Louisville with the best portal class in the country this year. And that's Dalen Swain for the Texas Longhorns. Does Dalen Swain come back or not? With the way that Texas has constructed their team, they have had such a phenomenal few weeks here in the transfer portal, assembling what next year's roster will look like. If Dalen Swain flips his decision and comes back to Texas, what a just coup of talent the Longhorns would have going into next season. I think the expectation, at least from what Dalen said at the Combine, is that he's going to go to the draft. But, you never know. You look around the rest of the SEC. Tyler Tanner has a huge decision to make for Vanderbilt. Milan Momcilovic is somebody that had been linked briefly to Kentucky. If he was to come out of the portal, a transfer from Iowa State, one of the best shooters in the history of the game. He's also been linked to Louisville. He's been linked to St. John's. Could Kentucky come in and just throw the bag at him and try to get him to come to Lexington? There are a ton of decisions. Ruben Chinyelu at Florida. You look at the SEC, I'm sure there are names I'm forgetting here. I'm just thinking of some of the big ones that really stand out.
Thomas.
There you go. That's another one. Malachi Moreno at Kentucky. Yes. I mean, we could do a 30-minute podcast just talking about the SEC decisions, but you're exactly right. This conference is really going to be shaped by the next 9 days and what these guys decide to do. Do they stay or do they go?
Absolutely, and I'm not sure which of these you feel like is the most impactful. Like, I don't think that Tyler Tanner maybe is the best player out there. I don't know if he's going to be necessarily the best pro or anything like that. I feel like his decision is the most impactful, though, because without him for Vanderbilt, I still think that they're like a middle-of-the-road SEC team, which is more than good enough to get in the NCAA tournament, perhaps compete for a top 25. But I feel like with versus without him, I feel like that might be the biggest swing for any team out there in the SEC.
Well, here's what you think back to some of these players over the years. You could think to a lot of players. Every year we see players that are superb players in college. Their game just fits how the college style goes, but they don't really translate to the professionals. Maybe they have a good career overseas, but they just never really make it in the NBA. Talk about covering the teams here in Cincinnati. I've covered the Xavier Musketeers closely. You think back to a couple of guys 7 or 8 years ago, Trayvon Blewett, JP McCura, two of the most impactful players in recent program history, phenomenal players in college. Game just didn't translate to the NBA level. JP had a cup of coffee in the NBA with the Charlotte Hornets, but you're not talking about guys that are mainstays. You're talking about guys that went overseas and had success. But you're right. When you look at guys that maybe do they go to the NBA? Do they not? What's their prospect looking like right now? Some of them can dominate so much at the college level. And yeah, I will say some of that has also changed with the way that talent has come, the international pool that has infiltrated college basketball now and the experience level, guys getting older, more physical. It's becoming more of that professional style as far as the experience and age and physicality. There is that element to it as well. But at the same time, I still love some of these players who we get to know and love following the sport night in and night out that might not translate as well to the NBA as some others, but to your point, will be phenomenal at the college level.
Absolutely, and I think that is going to be such a big decision to be looking at, and just so many of them out there in the SEC are interesting, as we're being joined by Paul Fritschner. He does such great work over at the Big East Digital Network, Rebound Rundown Podcast, and so much more right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then here's a big one that's away from the SEC. I thought Koa Pete, when this process began, I thought that he was going to be as good as gone, but he didn't necessarily grade out the best with his three-point shot, which anyone that watched college basketball knew that he was a work in progress with his outside shooting. How do you take a look at this one? Because with Arizona, I think regardless, they're certainly going to be a top 10 preseason team, even like a top 6, top 7 team, but I don't know if they quite challenge Florida and Duke for that number 1 spot coming into the preseason, but I feel like Koa Pete coming back to Arizona would be massive for them.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a guy that's 6'7" and is, has the length. He has the skill. He burst onto the scene. He was only a freshman last year, so you add on to that one more year of experience, and you come back to Arizona and you complement what they're already trying to build out there. Yeah, I don't know if I would have Arizona at the top in that upper echelon right now. But still, Tommy Lloyd is assembling a team that's going to challenge out there in the Big 12. So, of course, a guy in Koa Pete who, is very young still, but can match the physicality. You're right. Developing, you think back to the struggles that Arizona had this year. You talk about Koa Pete with, his struggles shooting the ball. Arizona as a team, they didn't shoot it well, and they weren't a volume 3-point shooting team either. So I'm wondering if some of that was just a casualty of the system, and maybe if he was to come back, that you could see a development if they lean into it just a little bit more in their play style next year under Tommy Lloyd. That remains to be seen. But regardless, to your point, Greg, Koa Pete coming back would be a massive difference maker. That goes without saying. It's pretty obvious. Probably one of the best players still yet to make a decision. Does he stay or does he go? Says he's focused on the draft, but we'll see. Again, a lot of these guys, you have to keep in mind, they might say they're going, but then they get some feedback on the last day, or somebody comes in at the last minute with an NIL offer, whatever it might be, that maybe they come back to school.
Yep, and you remember LeBaron Filan last season saying, "Oh, there's no way I'm coming back to college," and everything like that. And it was a case of welcome back. And hey, Amari Allen, he might be coming back to Alabama after he was graded out at 6'8" when he was at Alabama, and then he gets to the combine and he's more than 2 inches shorter, and that's not necessarily great as well. And I think that is so interesting because we're talking about a lot of these guys that might be surprises if they come back. Is there a surprise or two that you feel like might actually be gone while a lot of people thought that they were going to be coming back? Because the biggest one for me is Ruben Chenyolu. I felt like it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to be back at Florida. Still think that he is, but he performed very well at the combine. Are there a few other guys in mind that you think could surprise some people and actually leave school, especially with the fact that we've got a lot of guys coming back for this upcoming season?
Well, I don't know if this is as much a surprise because it kind of sounds like he's leaning toward the draft, but Merez Johnson Jr. is somebody from Michigan. You lose a guy in Daimara going to the draft who's obviously was one of the most impactful players in the country this year for the national champion. Are you able to get back a guy in Merez Johnson who would have stepped into a bigger role next year than even what he had this year on a national championship caliber team that went on and won the title? That's a decision that I'm looking at. I think you're right on with the Chenyolu decision there at Florida. Touched on him earlier when we were talking about the SEC. Merez is the one to me that I think kind of is one that I'm keeping an eye on. The other one too, because I'm interested to see where he would go if he does come back. Alan Graves from Santa Clara. Santa Clara, they tell you, should have beaten Kentucky this year. He's an not older, he's 20, but put himself in a transfer portal, got some size, great wingspan at 7 foot. He's 20 years old. But if he was to come back and transfer, say, to a blue blood or the SEC somewhere at a really impactful school, he's one that I can keep an eye on. And then obviously, I think maybe the biggest decision is Milan Momcilovic. Does he come back? Does he decide to stay in the draft? And does some team out there, Louisville, St. John's, Kentucky, or a surprise suitor somewhere else, land one of the best shooters ever?
Yep, I'm right there with you because Momcilovic, he should be able to get a lot of money for Kentucky because Kentucky has paid for a lot of role players. They need that star player. That would very much fit the bill. And I'm so glad you brought up Alan Graves as well because that leads us into what we saw on Monday with Yam Madar. Hopefully I said that correctly. The Eurostar was inked by LSU for $5 million. That's now reported because that's not finalized. He needs to get a waiver and everything like that. But how do we just look at LSU right now? Is having a tough time fielding a starting five. They're trying to be able to go international and pay Mr. Yam $5 million, which if that goes through, I don't think that that's great for college basketball, to say the least, but they've been one of the most interesting teams in the offseason because it feels sort of like the child in college that is trying to put together their research paper on the very, very last night.
It's so funny you say that because I work pretty closely with somebody who is a huge Alabama fan, went to Alabama, follows the SEC very closely. And I had a meeting earlier this morning and I came back to my desk and he told me about this and I'm sitting there, reading about it. I'm thinking about it. And, we keep hearing Will Wade and he keeps getting asked about the roster and, you don't have anybody yet. Well, or what does the roster look like? Yada, yada, yada. And he'll talk about, well, we feel good because we have all of these international guys coming in. Well, where are they? And now you're starting to see them trickle in. I think to me, LSU is going to have one of the most intriguing teams in the country next year. maybe not the best, but one of those teams where you think to yourself, they could be really good. We just, Greg, have no clue what they're going to be. They could be really good. They could be disappointing. We have no clue. And when you're talking about a Will Wade team, he goes back to LSU, all the drama with leaving NC State, and he's assembling a roster of international talent. They could be a challenger, or this strategy could totally flop. But I'm really interested in it because I'm not going to say it's a test case for everybody, because not everybody can recruit international players, an entire team of international players. They're kind of doing it out of necessity at this point. But, man, I am just so fascinated to see what that team's going to be like once they have a roster.
Oh, no question about it. It is a lot of clean family fun right now. I remember about 3 or so weeks ago, Mo Diabate was pretty much the only man on the roster. They've been able to fill it out a little bit more, but we've got a lot of moving parts there, as we do have our good friend Paul Fritschner, who does such great work over at the Rebound Rundown Podcast, joining me on Coast to Coast Soups. And my friend, I know that you're out there in Cincinnati, and obviously the Bearcats, and I would say a lot of teams out there in the Big 12 have had themselves a nice offseason. With bringing in Jared Calhoun, I feel like they made some nice moves in the transfer portal. Arizona State, fact that they've made the moves that they have here in the offseason, even Kansas State bringing in Casey Alexander. And how do you take a look at post-Cincinnati, and for lack of a better term, the teams that were towards the bottom of the Big 12 this past season? Because I feel like a lot of these teams have stuck a lot of resources into improving right away, and we both know that the Big 12 was a good conference last year. I think it's going to be even better this season with the way that all those bottom teams have looked themselves in the mirror and they said, we want to be competing for an NCAA tournament bid.
Yeah, and West Virginia is another team to me that sticks out. It's had a really nice portal season. But, going back to the Bearcats, they didn't retain anybody from this past year's roster. Tylen Riley, I would expect to be the best player, the transfer from Tulsa. They get a player in Miles Colvin who had his ups and downs this year, had some really bad moments, but also had some positive moments. He was on that Purdue team that played UConn in the national title game a couple of years ago. Tyler Tejada, the Towson transfer, who was the CAA player of the year not this past season, but last season, and was the preseason player of the year this year. Disappointing season for Towson, but Tejada, interested to see how his game translates to the Big 12 level. He needs to get tougher. He has the size, he has the athleticism, but he doesn't have the grittiness that I think a true Big 12 contender needs as far as players go. If you're talking about somebody that I don't want to put the pressure on him to say that he's going to be an all Big 12 caliber player, but there are sparks. There are times in Tyler Tejada's game where you sit there and you think to yourself watching him, wow, if he could really put it all together and grit out some of these situations, he really could be a player that challenges for an all-conference type spot if his game completely comes together at that level. Riley Allensbach, a transfer from George Mason. They really got older in the portal. All these players I've already talked about are seniors. Travion Carson as well from North Dakota State. Jaden Hastings out of Boston College. Kind of a depth piece there down low. Eric Mahaffey, a local kid here to Cincinnati, went to high school at Moeller. A redshirt sophomore, played on the Akron team that won the MAC title this year, went to the NCAA tournament. Brought up 3 guys from Utah State, Adlin El-Amin, Elijah Perryman, David Aweze, though all 3 of them were underclassmen at Utah State with Jared this season. So for Cincinnati, I'm not going to sit here and say for sure that they're an NCAA tournament team on May 18th. I think we need to see how this team comes together, because I have some concerns, especially in the post with them. I think Jaden Hastings is a decent player. I think Riley Allensbach is a decent player. They're a guard-oriented team that I have some concerns with inside. They have height, but do they have the real toughness and size? That's what I'm looking to have answered this year for Cincinnati.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I do think that for Calhoun, he's maybe going to sacrifice a few wins this season to be able to just put a stamp on the program, really instill his culture as well, and be looking at things in terms of year number 2, year number 3 as well. So I'm right there with you on that front. And then we have to bring this up as well, because for the Big East, it's been a little bit up and down. We know that it was a top-heavy conference last year, but I feel like this year it's going to be a little bit more balanced. Out there in your neck of the woods, Xavier, I've been very impressed by what they've been able to do. Not too far away, Providence, what they've been able to do here in the offseason. Impressed. And hey, Marquette figured out that they can utilize the transfer portal. Being someone from the state of Wisconsin, that warmed my heart. And I want to get your thoughts here because I think with the Big East, certainly UConn, even with losing Solo Ball, they do have to be the favorites here coming into the season. But that said, outside of UConn, I just feel like it's a much more deep Big East. And I feel like all these schools that aren't utilizing money for football, they're allocating it towards basketball, and they seem all in for this upcoming season.
It's a much deeper league. It'll be a much improved league from this past season.
Even DePaul spent.
You're right. Even DePaul, Magoon Guat, even the Blue Demons went out. The Mons, they went out and made some moves in the portal. I think, Greg, it's interesting looking at the Big East going into next year because they might not be as strong at the top where you say UConn and St. John's were for sure Final Four contenders going into the NCAA tournament. Like even UConn, you would have said, I think going into the tournament, we all thought St. John's had the bigger, loftier goals in the tournament. And then UConn goes and comes up a couple of possessions shorts of winning another national title. I don't know if the Big East is going to have multiple Final Four contenders next year. But what I do think is that they're going to have a handful of teams that will compete for the second weekend. And when you're talking about building this conference back up and the depth of the league and how solid they can be, I think that's really strong. And it's very important for the health of this league going forward. Where now, what I'm about to say, don't quote me on this going forward. Don't misquote me on this because I'm not going to say that the Big East is an 8-bid league. I'm not going to say that at all. What I will say, though, is that there are 8 teams in the league who I would not be surprised make the NCAA tournament. I think Butler, Georgetown, and Seton Hall, I think those are your 3 outliers. I would be very surprised if any one of those 3 made the tournament. Georgetown had an okay portal season, but they lost a lot too. I just don't think that Georgetown is going to be at the caliber of a tournament team next year. Same goes for Seton Hall and Butler. Butler under first-year head coach Ronald Norred. But I think Xavier's an NCAA tournament team next year. Marquette gets in the end of Frew. You're hoping he, is at the level they need him to be. But Marquette goes to the portal and has a nice little portal offseason. DePaul has made some moves. Villanova has impressed at the national level. St. John's is still waiting on some talent to commit. UConn's going to probably be a Final Four contender or at least be in that conversation. So you have a lot of team. Providence under Brian Hodgson had a great portal. I think there are going to be teams. Creighton under first-year head coach Alan Huss has talent there as well. I'm hoping I hit everybody there. I may not have. Apologies if I didn't, because outside of those 3 at the bottom, I think there are 8 teams who could challenge for a bid. And I think on Selection Sunday, I'll say this right now, I think the Big East will be a 5-bid league next year.
Oh, absolutely. I would be surprised if we get any less than 5 teams in the NCAA tournament. Further, as we now have 76 teams in the NCAA tournament as well. But absolutely, I love what these teams have been able to do. For DePaul, it feels like it's been since George Mikan was there that they've been respectable. So it's nice to see them going out and spending. And it's nice that we were able to get you aboard, Paul. Whether you're on the East Coast, the West Coast, whatever, you're doing a great job covering this great game of college basketball. You're spreading the good word of Coast to Coast Hoops, and that is very much appreciated as well. And you're doing such a great job with your own podcast, the Rebound Rundown Podcast. So love the good people at home. Know it's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, the Rebound Rundown, that's where you can follow us. It's all the work that we do is through that podcast. And it's really fun in the off season because we're going to be able to talk to some coaches, some other media members, people. We'll have to have you on at some point here in the off season. Greg, let's do it. Let's get you on to Rundown here some point in the next few months and, really go through what some of these teams look like, their landscapes going forward. If you're a Cincinnati area listener to Coast Hoops, then this show is really for you. And if you don't live around the Cincinnati area, the back half of every show, it's a daily show during the season. It'll cover the national landscape as well. So whether you're here in Cincinnati or whether you're somewhere around the country, it's a 10 or 15-minute show every day for your morning commute during the season, and it's weekly during the off season. So give it a listen, subscribe, and Greg, I always appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Between the baseball handicapping and the beer reviews, I've got plenty of time to join. It'll be an honor. And with Paul, he does such an excellent job looking at this great sport of college basketball. Always great to get him aboard. Big thanks to Paul for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming next, let's take a look at the news and notes we saw in college basketball Monday.
We have the tech to get food delivered in 15 minutes, but we all have horror stories about buying tickets. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage. Get amazing tickets in just a few taps. Fees are included, so what you see is what you pay. And the Game Time Guarantee means authentic tickets at the best price every time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to concerts, sports, comedy, and more with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cuts Soups with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Paul Fritschner. He does such great work over at the Rebound Rundown Podcast. He's doing a great job over at the Big East Digital Network and so much more. Every single time he joins me on such great insights. He did so once again today. So big thanks to Paul for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. This is a guy that's not transferring. This is a guy that's actually staying at his former school, Mikey Williams. He was really good over at Sacramento State this last season. 4.5 assists, 17 points per game, dealt with a little bit of injury, and did shoot less than 30% from three-point range, but looked like a really good point guard, a former top 150 recruit. He's going to be staying at Sacramento State, and for Sacramento State, obviously tumultuous year for Mike Bibby in year number one. They were dealing with an injury to Jeremiah Cherry, their main low post presence. They've done a nice job in terms of revamping and being much better in the post for this upcoming season. You just had a little bit of question mark as how the backcourt was going to be coming together. This very much tells you how that backcourt is going to be coming together, and I think that they're going to be a force out there in the West Coast for Sacramento State. Look at what they've done here in the offseason, bringing in Osiris Grady, who is over at UC Riverside, solid scorer for them. Larry Hughes Jr., he was averaging 15-plus points per game over at CSUN. Rudvan Tudic, he was a nice big man over at Sonel. This is looking like a really good roster right now for Sacramento State. So the fact that they're able to get one of their own to stay in Mikey Williams, that's big for them. Austin Nunez, he was one of the better players for UTSA, Meep the Roadrunners last year. Averaged 10 points per game, about 2.8 assists per contest. He's heading on over to LSU. Now for LSU, are we going to be able to get the international man of mystery in there? That is right now the big giant question mark, because obviously that was the splashier move. Now he saw from the team on Monday, but this does provide a little bit of depth. Prior to UTSA for Nunez, he spent some time at Arizona State and Mississippi. He did not really see minutes at either of those two stops, but he is a former top 150 recruit this past season. He was shooting in that neighborhood about 25% from three-point range, so certainly is going to need to work on that a little bit there. But overall, a guy that I think is going to be able to come in, give LSU a little bit of something. They're going to be building around a lot of Mo Diabate here this season. They've also got the international man that comes in for Brazil. Name is right now escaping me, but he should be able to give them a little bit of versatility as well. Still just wonder how LSU is going to be able to mix and match. You're going to need some waivers for these international men of mystery as well. Still lots of question marks for LSU, but they get that one up on the board. Dwayne Pierce, he was over at North Carolina A&T this last season, and he had his season cut short to 24 games due to injury, but still, he was a solid player for them. He was able to supply about 8.5 points, 2.7 assists per game, shot 31% from three as a 6'5", a little bit of a wing player. He's decided that he is going to be heading on over to Grambling, and for Grambling, along with a lot of these schools out there in the SWAC, it was a little bit slow going for them early on in the transfer portal process, but all of a sudden, they're putting together a relatively good roster. Grambling was one of the best teams in the country in terms of generating turnovers. I think that his active hands are going to be able to translate well from North Carolina A&T. You bring in Jose Grullon. He 2 seasons ago was a double-figure scorer over at UT Martin. Kyle Layton very much fits the system. Coming over from Eastern Illinois, they're gambling on Isaiah Miranda, a 7-footer that was a former top 250 recruit that just has never been able to stay out there on the floor no matter where he's been, but still a guy that has quite a bit of upside. I do think that they've done a nice job in terms of revamping this roster, so do like this move for them. This one I think is good for Clemson. David Fuchs, he last season was over with the Dons of San Francisco, was at Rhode Island earlier in his career. He averaged last year 12.5 points, just under 8 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's going to be stretching the floor and popping it and locking it from three-point shoot much. A career about 28.5% three-point shooter, but very much a dominant low-post presence. He's heading on over to Clemson, and that very much fits the Clemson system. Clemson, always a whole is greater than the sum of its parts sort of team, and for Clemson, would like to see them maybe get a little bit more depth because it's a little bit down from all the pieces that they lose from last season, but they also bring in Dylan Faulkner, who is a nice 16-plus point per game scorer over at Sanford. That's going to be able to help them out down low. Latarius Levicius, he was a good three-point shooter over at TCU and Oregon State the last 2 seasons. He helps out in the backcourt. Cole Kurta saw some nice minutes over at Notre Dame, so Clemson taking the same approach. You're not going to have that one star, but they're going to be built around just having good overall depth, and I do think that this is a nice add for them. You've got Kyle Cuffey, Cuffey. He was over at Mercer this last season, and he has decided that he is going to be heading to St. John's. Now, for St. John's, if they're relying upon Cuffey to be, shall we say, the guy that just brings them to the promised land, they are probably mistaken. Now, did begin his career over at Kansas and Syracuse, a former top 150 recruit, but even at Mercer this last year, he was a part-time starter. He was averaging 7.5 points, shot 34% from three-point range, and for this St. John's group, it's very clear that they're hoping and praying that Zuby Ejiofor is just able to put the team on his back once again this season. Still have to wonder about the backcourt of this team as well, because for St. John's, they really have been silent here in the transfer portal, while a lot of these other teams out there in the Big East have made some big moves, like they bring in Avery Brown. He was okay over at Columbia. I like the pickup of Donnie Freeman. That's going to be all up them out, but other than Donnie Freeman, really no splash moves here in the offseason for St. John's. As we know, this is a program that really doesn't bring in any freshmen whatsoever currently under Slick Rick Pitino, so do have a few question marks. Expected a little bit more here from St. John's in the offseason. You've got Marley Curtis. He was over at North Dakota this last season. Solid player at 6'8", 6 points, 3.5 rebounds per game. He's going to help out a James Madison group that they just weren't the same team defensively that they have been in the past. North Dakota was really good in terms of generating turnovers. James Madison, they were doing absolutely none of that whatsoever. Now, our main guy, Marley, he was not necessarily one of the guys that was going out there and getting you a whole bunch of turnovers or anything like that, but has a little bit of versatility. Shot about 31% from three-point range, and even with only playing about 16.5 minutes per game, 0.7 steals per game, that's honestly not too bad. I think that he's going to be able to give this team a little bit of versatility, some stretchability, and I think that for James Madison, they look themselves in the mirror. They need to get back to playing what has been so good for Preston Spradlin in the past. They bring in KJ Wyndham along Garrett Sandra from the Power Conference ranks, Kevon Riley. I really like that move for them as well. Gage Lattimore coming over from NC Central. So for James Madison, they've done a nice job in terms of filling out this roster. This is a nice, in my opinion, most likely depth piece for them. Darius Washington III, he was over at Kennesaw State. We give our to Lane Kiffin goals. He has decided that he is going to be adding on over to Coastal Carolina. Guy that was able to average about 5.5 points per game this last season. Not a guy that is necessarily going to be like a star player or anything like that, but for Coastal Carolina, I would say that they were a little bit too top heavy this last season. Washington is a guy that I think can really take the load off. 6'5" combo player that shot about 32.5% from three-point range, was a little bit limited due to injury through about 24 games last season, but a guy that also had just under 2 assists per game as well for Coastal Carolina. They have been a team that over the last few seasons just has not generated any turnovers whatsoever. They pride themselves on playing just good, tough, not allow you to get clean looks sort of defense, and I feel like they're changing that a little bit, bringing in Jalen Cross, who is able to see some minutes over at Wake Forest. Trey Perry, who was a big part of that Miami of Ohio team in the backcourt from a season ago, and bringing in Ashton Hardaway in the offseason last week. That was big for them as well. So Coastal Carolina doing a solid job there. They do lose a little bit of size by the transfer portal, so we'll see if they're able to add a big man or not, but do like the way that things are coming together for them. You've got Jeremiah Johnson, who was very rock solid over at Campbell this last season. He's heading to Tulsa, and I think that this is a good ad for Tulsa. Now, I just flat out don't think that Tulsa is going to be the same three-point shooting team that they were last season. Top 15 team with regards to three-point shooting percentage, and Campbell, and Johnson, he was really that main man for Campbell with his three-point shooting 37.5% from 3, 86.5% the free throw line, 15 points, 3.5 boards. Now his defense left a little bit of something to be desired, and Campbell was a team that turned the ball over a little bit more than what you expected. Also, when Johnson was over at UW Green Bay, he was a double-figure scorer for them as well. We'll see how he's able to take the leap forward on up to the American Conference, but I do think that this is a good ad for them, because I was wondering where some of that three-point shooting was going to be coming from for Tulsa, because they added someone like a Mike Williams. He clearly helps out the defense coming over from Seton Hall, but wasn't necessarily too much of a three-point shooter. McCone Emery, he comes over from Delaware. He gives you good versatility. Chris Lufay, he locks things down low from Middle Tennessee. Brent Moss is a little bit of a mixer and shaker from UTSA. Meet the Roadrunners. Coach B. Williams, who comes over from Missouri State, he'll also give you a little bit of three-point shooting as well, but now things are really coming together for the team. Alexa Demetrovich, who he was a 7'1" big man that just couldn't get out there for Creighton this last season. So for Tulsa, it looks like they're going very, very balanced. I like what they've done here in the offseason. I think that that's a good one for them. The deuce is loose. Deuce Paschal, he was over at Weber State this last season. He was averaging about 2.5 boards, about 4 points per game. He heads on over to Indiana State, and for Indiana State, it just feels like they have really fallen behind here in the transfer portal for Indiana State. They had a guy or two within the system that they've actually lost here in the transfer portal as well, so that's not great to say the least. And for Indiana State, bringing in Joe Chappelle should be able to help them out down the line. Did like the pickup of Kamari Gregory a few weeks ago, coming over from USC Upstate, but it feels like they're just adding a bunch of guys at this point. They need to do a better job in terms of taking care of the ball. They weren't necessarily a great three-point shooting team last year, and McGuire Mitchell should help them in terms of generating turnovers. Michi White should as well, but it still looks like a team that could really utilize a point guard. I don't know what they're expecting out of Chance Poyer is coming over from SMU, but feels like a mismatch right now, and for Indiana State, it feels like they're not keeping up with the Joneses out there in the Missouri Valley Conference, even though they brought in a high, shall we say, quantity amount of transfers. I don't know if they really got a lot of quality. You've got Donovan Raymond. He last season was over at Old Dominion, and he has decided that he is going to be going to Western Carolina. For Raymond last year, just was really having a tough time getting out there on the floor. Point and a half, rebound and a half per contest at 6'9", and I would expect this to be nothing more than a depth piece for Western Carolina. Western Carolina was very good on the glass last season. It was very clear that what they needed to address was the backcourt because their backcourt defense was not very good. They've always had a tough time in terms of generating turnovers, and they were well outside the top 300 with regards to opponents' three-point shooting percentage last season. They addressed that with bringing in Malachi Brown a week or two ago from Georgia State. That's going to be able to help them out. And Jackson Parenti, I think that he's a high upside guy that just was lost in the shadow of a lot of pieces over at Charleston as well. So now they add a little bit of size. They do lose quite a few guys from a season ago, so might be a little bit of a newer look for this Western Carolina team than a season ago. But I do like the fact that they are adding a little bit more size. Probably going to need to get one or two more proven big men to be able to not have a fall off as well. And then for Western Carolina, they lost his man. This is Justin Johnson, and he has decided that he is going to be going to the Sharks of Long Island. And Long Island has had a really interesting offseason. The pair of twins that they've got coming over from the NIIA ranks are like former top 50 recruits. Last year for Johnson, he was a solid player over at Western Carolina, about 6.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's really going to bomb it from three-point range, but provide size at 6'8" for Long Island. They were one of the better teams in terms of hitting the boards out there in the NEC now. NEC is just one of the lower ranked conferences in all of college basketball, to call it what it is, but for Long Island, they've done a really good job in terms of being able to retain quite a bit of the roster from a season ago as well, so I do salute them for that. And for this Long Island group, I do think that they've went through this offseason, they've really done things the right way in general. For Long Island, they also were able to thank Vashawn Alouette, who was a nice double-figure scorer over at Old Dominion a few seasons ago, was solid over at TCU. Josh Pickett is a guy that I like coming over from Presbyterian. They've added a few guys from the non-D1 ranks as well, so I think that they're probably going to be, once again, the team to beat out there in the NEC for this upcoming season. Mike Price, he was over at Cal State Bakersfield, meet for the Roadrunners. He has decided that he is going to be heading on over to Chicago State. For Chicago State, they have been, well, one of the butt cracks of all of college basketball over the last few seasons, so this is a step in the right direction for them. And hey, Chicago State was a little bit more respectable this past season. They were able to do a good job with regards to their backcourt play. They were able to generate some turnovers. Just got absolutely destroyed down low. Both their offensive and defensive two-point shooting percentages were some of the lowest in all of college basketball. Adding a guy in Price who should be able to give you a little bit of versatility. Shot about 32.5% for three-point range, average 6.5 points per game. He should be able to help out, and he is a native of the great city of Chicago, so he has familiarity with the area, so he's a coming home sort of kid here. So that's big for a Chicago State team that they haven't added a ton here in the transfer portal, but the moves that they made, I actually think are relatively okay. They're also going to be bringing in Malika Olafi. He was a guy over at Eastern Illinois that was able to generate some turnovers. He very much fits the system. Amar Caraway, he comes over from Charleston Southern as well. They really need to add some size to help out the rebounding, so we're still awaiting that, but do like this move for them. And then Alex Dupree, he was over at Portland State this last season. He was averaging only about 3.5 points, 2 rebounds per game. He decides that he's going to be heading on over to Utah Tech, and Portland State was a really good defensive team for Dupree. He's 6'5", a little bit of a combo player, so he should be able to fit the system. A little bit of a unknown as to what we're going to be able to get out of him. But for Utah Tech, this was a team that was much better down low than they had been in the early, shall we say, first few seasons since they made the transition from the Division II ranks. And for Utah Tech, it's been a little bit up and down in terms of what we've seen from them here in the offseason, but it feels like they're starting to finally get the ball rolling. They also brought in Mark Brown Jr., who was a very solid player over at Valparaiso last season. Rex Sutherland, he helps out the backcourt as well, so I'd like to see them be able to address the low post play because they do lose quite a few of the solid players that they had in the post a season ago, but they are doing a nice job in terms of being able to just revamp a backcourt that last season they were really good in terms of guarding the three-point line. They're absolutely awful with regards to their own three-point shooting, so that's something to take note of as well. And when it comes to this college basketball offseason, I'm doing my best to try to take note of everything for you guys, and if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever, have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at @GUnit_81. Keep in mind, largely on the mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, that's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Paul Fritschner. He does great work with the Rebound Rundown Podcast, Field of 68, and so much more. He joined me in the last segment, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast. Once things get sorted out with the rosters, I'll give you guys a specialized conference preview podcast for all of these conferences, and then once we get in season picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Take care.
We have the tech to get food delivered in 15 minutes, but we all have horror stories about buying tickets. The Game Time app gives fans the advantage. Get amazing tickets in just a few taps. Fees are included, so what you see is what you pay. And the Game Time guarantee means authentic tickets at the best price every time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to concerts, sports, comedy, and more with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
This is the new Weight Watchers, built for real life and real results, no matter what mode you're in. Maddie went all in for her big day and lost 33 pounds. Emily lost 85 pounds and hit her goal while still living her life.
Weight Watchers gave me the tools and I feel amazing.
Join the millions of members and lose weight with the #1 doctor-recommended weight loss program. Lose more at WeightWatchers.com.
At 6 months, participants in a clinical trial of Weight Watchers program lost an average of 12 pounds.